Hello everyone, welcome to Skilled Dev. Trey here, and in this lesson, we're going to discuss JavaScript array methods. JavaScript array methods are becoming an increasingly important part of the language. Many developers and companies are actually preferring them over standard for loops. While using the array methods probably won't be required in your interview, if you're able to incorporate them into your solution, it will show you have a very strong command over the language and understand how to write powerful, modern web applications. In this lesson, we're going to take for loops and then refactor them into code using array methods. We'll consider map, filter, find, sum, every, and includes. We're going to exclude, for each, and reduce. While they're also used in production and can be very powerful, they're pretty broad, whereas these methods here have a very direct and specific use case. So why would we want to use array methods over for loops? Many people still prefer for loops, and there's nothing wrong with using them. I even use them frequently in this course. They're very straightforward and upfront about the logic that we want to implement. However, there are some key benefits to array methods that allow us to write very clean code and very powerful and expressive code. For one, they have a very succinct syntax. You can accomplish the same thing with an array method that would take many more lines of code using a for loop. They have a declarative behavior. For loops are imperative, meaning you try to say how things are done, but with array methods, they're declarative, which means you say what you want to be done. So you have an array method such as map or filter, which already means you're going to either transform an item or remove items from this array, and then you just pass it a callback that will hook into that array method's logic to accomplish this in your solution. Array methods enforce immutability. Immutability means we don't change an item after it's declared, and this keeps your code from being brittle. When you know an item won't change, you can trust its value at any point in the code. So for array methods, if the return value is an array, it always returns a new array, so that original input is never changed. Array methods reduce the risk of side effect behavior. When you have these very specific use cases and transformations, you likely aren't going to be stuffing it with other logic that can impact the rest of your code and create these hard to detect bugs. And finally, and maybe most importantly, array methods have a very explicit intent. If you're going to map something, you know you're going to transform each item. If you're going to filter something, you know you're going to be removing items and only keeping ones that follow certain criteria. So if someone's reading your code and they see a map, or they see a filter, or one of these other methods, they immediately know what you're going to do in this code block. They don't need to read through and parse a for loop to understand the underlying purpose. All right, so let's dive into these questions. We're going to take arrays, run them through normal for loops, and then see how we can refactor that using an array method. Here we just have an array of numbers. We iterate through each number in the array, and then we transform that number by taking that item and multiplying it by 2. So what we're doing is applying the same transformation to every item. We're doubling every number. Whenever you want to transform each item in the array by the same thing, this is a perfect time to use map. You say array.map, and then it goes through every item. Then you take that item, apply the transformation. In this case, we're doubling it or multiplying it by 2, and then you return that value. Since this is an arrow function, it's just implicitly returning item times 2, so then it multiplies everything from the original array times 2 and creates this new array. You can see it went from 3 lines to just 1 line, and is very explicit in that we wanted to make some transformation to these items. Now we take this same input array, we iterate through each item, but we also created the solution array where we're checking if the remainder of an item is 0. So if you divide it by 2 and it equals 0, this is an even number. So we want to see if every item is even, and then if it is even, we push it to the solution array. In this case, 2 and 4 are the only even numbers. So we have the original array. We want to remove items or filter out items that don't follow some criteria. In this case, they're not even. So when you run filter, it goes through each item. Then you apply a Boolean statement. It should return true or false. And if it returns true, it is kept in your output array. And if it returns false, then it is just filtered out or removed. Item modulo 2 equals 0. If that remainder is 0, then it's even. We keep it in the array. Otherwise, for the odd ones, they're just excluded in this new solution array. Now we're writing a function. It's called isFriend. we're taking in an array of friends' names as strings, and then the name we want to find within this array. We iterate through each item. If that array item is equal to the name, we return true. Otherwise, we return false. So what we're trying to do is just see if this name is included in the original array. And that's why we would use the includes method. Includes just returns true or false if an item exists within an array. We can see this drastically reduced the number of lines of code we needed. We write this function. This function says friends.includesName, and then it will return true or false. Much simpler, much more succinct than actually iterating through each item and checking if it exists. Here we're working with an array of objects. Each user will have an ID and a name. We're going to write the getFriend method that will iterate through all the friends, look to see if one has the ID that we're looking for, and then return that friend. So somewhat similar to our includes method, but we actually want to return the item. Previously with includes, it was returning true or false. Here, if we find the item, we want to return it. So what we do is we try to find that item. So we call array.find. It iterates through each item, and then you pass it some true or false criteria. If it matches this criteria, the friend ID is equal to ID, then it actually returns that friend. So similar to includes, where it looks for the item, but in this case, just also returns the item to the user. Here we have an array of numbers. We want to write a function all are even, then it iterates through each number, checks that the modulo of 2 is not equal to 0. If this is true, then at least one of the items is not even, and it returns false. If it iterates through all of these items, it never returns false, then they all must be even, so it returns true. So we're executing this logic on every item in the array. So that's why we would use the every method. If every item passes this logic, or they return true, then every returns true. So they all match the criteria we're looking for. If even one of them fails, it returns false, then every returns false. This time we just want to check if at least one is even. So if even one of those items is even, we return true. If none are even, or they're all odd, then we return false. So we iterate through all the items, do our modulo check, but this time check if it's equals instead of not equals. If even one passes, it returns true. If we iterate through all the items and none pass, we return false. So what we're trying to do is check if at least one item passes, or some of the items pass. This is when we would use the sum method. If even one returns true, some returns true. Otherwise, if they all return false, then this returns false. So these are some ways we can use array methods instead of for loops in our JavaScript code and refactor it to be a little more declarative, a little more succinct, and very expressive in what we're trying to write. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you in the next lesson.